David Johnson parked his old but reliable sedan in the grocery store's lot in Chicago. It was a cool afternoon, and he was looking forward to picking up a special treat for his wife, Emily, and their twin daughters, Sophie and Lily. David and Emily had a cozy home in a quiet neighborhood, and their family life was filled with joy. Sophie and Lily, both 7 years old, were bundles of energy, and David wanted to do something nice for them after a long week. As David walked toward the store, his mind wandered over various possibilities for the treat. Maybe some fresh pastries or a new game for the girls. Just then, his attention was drawn to a figure standing outside the store entrance. It was an elderly woman, her clothes tattered and dirty, holding a small cardboard box. The sight of her, shivering in the chilly wind, caught David's eye. The woman's appearance was a stark contrast to the bustling shoppers who moved past her with clear avoidance. They seemed to make an effort to steer clear, their faces reflecting a mix of discomfort and indifference. David's heart ached at the sight. The woman's clothes were worn and patched, and her hands, as she held the box, looked rough and scarred. David drew closer and could hear her quietly pleading, "Just a few coins, please. I need enough for a meal." Her voice was frail and strained, a stark contrast to the bustling energy of the grocery store. Suddenly, a security guard appeared from inside the store. His demeanor was brusque as he approached the woman. "Hey, you can't stay here. You're scaring away the customers," he said sharply, his tone laden with irritation. "The store director doesn't want you here." The woman looked up, her face lined with age and hardship. She was in her 50s, and her eyes, partially hidden behind large, dark sunglasses, were filled with a mix of shame and resignation. "I'm not bothering anyone, sir. I just need a little money for something to eat." The guard was unmoved. "You're probably used to begging instead of working. Haven't you ever had a job?" "Probably not." His words were harsh, and he seemed to take pleasure in his authority. David felt a surge of anger at the guard's treatment of the woman. He stepped forward, his voice firm. "Excuse me, but that's not necessary. She's just asking for a little help." The guard glanced at David, a hint of hesitation in his eyes. It was one thing to be harsh to a homeless woman, but to be challenged by a fellow citizen was another matter. With a final scowl, the guard turned and walked back inside the store, muttering under his breath. The woman, still clutching her box, looked at David with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. "Thank you, sir. I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she said softly. David noticed something peculiar as he glanced at her more closely. Her hands, while weathered, were not as dirty as one might expect from someone living on the streets. There was also a distinct scar on her right hand, shaped like a skull. It was a curious mark, and David felt a strange pang of recognition. Without fully understanding why, David felt a powerful urge to help. He reached into his pocket and pulled out $1,500. "Here, take this. I know it's more than you need for a meal, but it's the least I can do." The woman's eyes widened in surprise, and tears welled up. I don't know what to say. "Thank you so much," she stammered, her voice trembling with emotion. David smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection. "Just take care of yourself." As he turned to head into the store, David couldn't shake the feeling that he knew the woman from somewhere. The scar on her hand was striking and seemed to stir up old memories. The brief but intense interaction with the security guard and the woman's heartfelt gratitude lingered in David's mind. He pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. But as he selected a few items in the store, he couldn't help but wonder about the woman's story. The encounter had been brief, but it had left a mark on him, making him curious about the life of the woman he had just helped. David knew he would probably never see her again, but he hoped that the money would provide some comfort. As he made his way to the checkout, he glanced back outside, where the woman was slowly moving away, her steps slightly more assured. Little did David know, this chance encounter was just the beginning of a much deeper connection that would soon unfold. David Johnson arrived home, the grocery bags in tow, as the sun began to dip below the horizon. His mind was still preoccupied with the elderly woman he had encountered outside the store. The scar on her hand, shaped like a skull, had left an unsettling mark on his memory. He pushed aside his curiosity, focusing on the joy of spending the evening with Emily, Sophie, and Lily. As David entered his charming house in Chicago, the warm, inviting scent of dinner greeted him. Emily, his loving wife, was setting the table while Sophie and Lily eagerly waited by their seats. The twins, with their bright eyes and cheerful chatter, instantly brightened David's mood. "Daddy!" Sophie and Lily exclaimed in unison as they ran to hug him. David grinned, kneeling down to embrace his daughters. "Hey, my little princesses. Guess what? I brought home a special treat for you." Emily walked over, her eyes twinkling with a knowing smile. "Let me guess, pastries?" "Exactly," David replied, handing her a box of freshly baked pastries. "I figured we could have a little celebration tonight." As the family enjoyed their treat, David couldn't shake off the memory of the homeless woman. Between bites, he mentioned the encounter to Emily. "You know, I met this woman outside the store today." David started, his voice tinged with concern. "She was really down on her luck, and I ended up giving her $1,500. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. $1,500? That's a lot of money. What happened?" David recounted the interaction, including the harsh treatment from the security guard and the woman's emotional reaction. "There was something about her. The scar on her hand was unusual, a skull of all things. It felt like I'd seen it before." Emily listened attentively, her face reflecting concern and curiosity. "You did a generous thing. But why do you think the scar seemed familiar?" "I don't know," David admitted. "Maybe it's just me. I can't get it out of my head." That evening, as David settled into bed, he found himself replaying the encounter over and over. He wondered about the woman's past, how she had ended up on the streets, and why the scar seemed so familiar. The more he thought about it, the more unsettled he felt. The next morning, David decided to take a detour on his way to work. He wanted to find out more about the woman, if possible. After a quick search, he discovered that the grocery store where he had met her was in a somewhat rough part of town. Determined to follow through, he visited the area. David inquired with local shopkeepers and people in the neighborhood about the woman. Most were either unfamiliar with her or reluctant to talk. However, a kind-hearted coffee shop owner named Maria offered some information. "Yes, I've seen her around," Maria said, her face showing empathy. "Her name is Margaret Thompson. She used to be a respected doctor, but she's fallen on hard times. She lost everything in a tragic fire." David's heart sank as Maria continued. "She used to be known for her skill and kindness. I heard the fire took away her family and her career. She tried to recover, but the emotional toll was too much. She turned to alcohol, and that led to losing her home and job." The details struck a chord with David. Margaret's story was more tragic than he had imagined. He realized that the woman he had helped was once a person of great achievement and compassion. It pained him to think of how drastically her life had changed. "Do you know where I might find her?" David asked Maria. Maria hesitated but eventually provided a general idea of where Margaret might be found. David thanked her and left, feeling a deep sense of urgency to reconnect with Margaret. Later that day, David returned to the neighborhood, following Maria's directions. He wandered through the streets until he finally spotted Margaret sitting on a park bench, her head bowed and her usual cardboard box beside her. David approached cautiously, his heart pounding. "Margaret," he called out gently. Margaret looked up, her eyes meeting David's. For a moment, her expression was a mixture of surprise and caution. "Yes, it's David Johnson," he said, extending a hand. "We met outside the grocery store yesterday." Margaret's eyes widened in recognition, but she remained guarded. "Oh yes, I remember." David continued, "I wanted to check on you. I've learned more about your situation and wanted to offer more help if you need it." Margaret's eyes softened, but there was still a hint of skepticism. "I appreciate your kindness, but I'm not sure what else I can ask for." David took a deep breath. "I know this might sound strange, but there's something about you I can't forget. That scar on your hand, it reminded me of something from my past. I'm hoping that maybe you could share your story with me. Margaret looked away, her face a mix of pain and resignation. I've told my story before, but it's not easy to relive. David nodded, respecting her hesitance. I understand, but if you're willing, I'd like to help you in any way I can. Margaret seemed to weigh his words. After a long silence, she finally spoke. All right, I'll tell you. But it's not a happy story. David sat down beside her, ready to listen, knowing that the truth might be more profound and painful than he could ever imagine. Margaret took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the ground. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the park, but it did little to warm the chill in her voice as she began to recount her story. It was almost 10 years ago, Margaret started, her voice trembling. I was a successful doctor, known for my expertise and dedication. I had a husband, Tom, and a young son, Alex. Life was good. David listened intently, sensing the weight of her words. Margaret continued, her voice softening with each memory. Tom and I were happily married. Alex was our pride and joy. We lived in a beautiful house, and I had a fulfilling career. But then, everything changed. There was a fire. It started in the middle of the night. Margaret paused, her eyes glazing over as she relived the trauma. The fire spread quickly. We tried to escape, but we were trapped. Tom and Alex, they didn't make it. I was the only one who survived. David's heart ached as he listened. He could see the pain etched on Margaret's face, the anguish of losing her family in such a sudden and devastating way. The loss was unbearable, Margaret said, her voice cracking. I fell into a deep depression. I lost my job, my home, everything. I turned to alcohol to numb the pain. It was a slow spiral into darkness. David's mind raced as he absorbed the gravity of Margaret's story. He recalled the scar on her hand, the one shaped like a skull. It was a visible reminder of the trauma she had endured, a mark of a life shattered. I lost everything, Margaret continued. I ended up on the streets. I tried to get help, but the shame and pain were too much. I became a shell of the person I once was. David reached out, placing a comforting hand on Margaret's shoulder. I had no idea you had gone through so much. I'm so sorry. Margaret looked up, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you for listening. It's not easy to share this, but it helps to know that someone cares. David was moved by her vulnerability. You're not alone anymore. I want to help you. I know $1,500 is a lot, but it's a start. I want to offer you a place to stay and help you get back on your feet. Margaret was taken aback. Are you sure? I don't want to impose. I'm not the person I once was. David shook his head firmly. It's not about who you were. It's about who you can become again. I believe in second chances. And if you're willing, I'd like to offer you one. Margaret hesitated, the conflict evident on her face. I don't know. It's been so long since I've been part of a family. I don't want to be a burden. David smiled reassuringly. You won't be a burden. You'll be a part of our family, and we'll support you every step of the way. It's what anyone would do for someone in need. Margaret's resolve began to waver. The offer of help, so genuine and heartfelt, was something she hadn't expected. She looked into David's eyes and saw a glimmer of hope she had long since abandoned. All right, Margaret said finally, her voice filled with cautious optimism. I'll take you up on your offer. I'd like to start over, if you're sure it's not too much trouble. David's face lit up with relief and gratitude. Of course. Let's get you settled. We can start by getting you some new clothes and finding a comfortable place for you to stay. As they stood up, David helped Margaret gather her belongings. They walked together to his car, and Margaret marveled at the kindness David was showing her. It felt like a dream, one she had almost given up on. On the drive to David's home, Margaret glanced out the window, reflecting on the sudden turn of events. She had spent years in despair, and now she was being offered a chance to rebuild her life. The enormity of David's generosity was overwhelming. When they arrived at David's house, Emily greeted them with a warm smile. The atmosphere in the house was welcoming, and Margaret felt a sense of comfort she hadn't experienced in years. Sophie and Lily, curious about their new guest, shyly approached Margaret and greeted her with the innocence only children possess. Hi, I'm Sophie, "And this is Lily," Sophie said, holding out her hand. "Do you want to play with us?" Margaret's eyes softened at the sight of the twin girls. "Hello, Sophie and Lily. I'd love to." Emily led Margaret inside and showed her to a guest room, freshly prepared and inviting. As Margaret settled in, she felt a mixture of gratitude and trepidation. This was a new beginning, but it also meant confronting the ghosts of her past. David joined Emily and Margaret in the living room later that evening. "We'll make sure you have everything you need," Emily assured her. "It's important for us to help, and we want you to feel at home." Margaret nodded, her heart swelling with appreciation. "Thank you both. I don't know how to express my gratitude, but I promise to do my best to contribute and find my way." David and Emily exchanged a look of understanding. They knew that Margaret's journey would be challenging, but they were committed to supporting her every step of the way. For now, they were focused on providing Margaret with the stability and compassion she so desperately needed. Weeks had passed since Margaret moved in with David and his family. The initial days were a whirlwind of adjustments and new beginnings, but gradually, Margaret found her footing. David and Emily's home had become a sanctuary, and the warmth of the household helped Margaret heal in ways she hadn't imagined possible. The twins, Sophie and Lily, had taken to Margaret with genuine affection. They enjoyed spending time with her, and Margaret found solace in their youthful energy. It wasn't long before she began to feel like a cherished part of their lives, rather than an outsider. One crisp morning, as Margaret sat at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee, David joined her. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his tone filled with genuine concern. Margaret looked up, a soft smile on her lips. "I'm feeling better. Much better, actually. The last few weeks have been transformative. I never thought I'd find this kind of peace again." David nodded, his face reflecting his own sense of relief and satisfaction. "I'm glad to hear that. We've been talking, and we think it's time for you to start thinking about your future." Margaret's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" Emily joined them, carrying a small stack of papers. "We've been working on something. There's a medical help center nearby that supports people in challenging situations. We spoke with them, and they're willing to bring you on as a consultant." Margaret's eyes widened in surprise. "You did that for me?" David smiled. "We believe in you, Margaret. Your skills and experience are valuable. We want you to have a chance to use them again." Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes. She had spent years feeling worthless, and now she was being offered a chance to contribute once more. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Emily said gently. "Just knowing you're finding your way back is enough for us." The transition to her new role was both challenging and rewarding. Margaret took to the work with dedication, her medical knowledge proving invaluable to the center's clients. The job didn't restore her former status, but it provided her with a renewed sense of purpose. She felt fulfilled knowing she was making a difference, however modest. In the evenings, Margaret enjoyed time with David's family. The bond she formed with Sophie and Lily deepened, and she became a beloved figure in their lives. They often played games together, and Margaret found joy in their laughter and playfulness. One Sunday afternoon, as the family gathered for a meal, David raised a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, looking at Margaret with a warm smile. "And to the incredible person who's become a part of our family." Margaret's eyes were misty with emotion. "Thank you, David, Emily. You've given me a second chance, and I will forever be grateful." David and Emily exchanged a proud glance. They knew the road ahead for Margaret would still have its challenges, but seeing her regain her confidence and joy was a reward in itself. As the days turned into months, Margaret continued to rebuild her life. She began to focus on her own healing, and her interactions with David's family became a source of immense comfort and joy. The support and kindness she had received allowed her to rediscover her strengths and passions. One day, while working at the medical center, Margaret received a letter from a former colleague. It was an offer to collaborate on a project, something she had once dreamt of doing. It was a symbol of her return to the professional world, a sign that her past wasn't entirely lost. When she shared the news with David and Emily, their joy was palpable. "This is amazing," Emily exclaimed. "You're truly back on your path." Margaret beamed, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment. I couldn't have done it without all of you. As she reflected on her journey, Margaret marveled at the unexpected connections that had shaped her life. The kindness of strangers had helped her find her way, and the support of David's family had given her a new beginning. In the quiet moments of her day, Margaret often looked out the window, feeling a deep sense of peace. The road had been long and arduous, but she had found a place where she belonged, a place where her spirit could heal and thrive. The story of David and Margaret became a testament to the power of kindness and the profound impact that one person's compassion can have on another's life. Margaret's journey from despair to hope was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a chance for redemption and renewal. And so, as the sun set over Chicago, Margaret embraced her new life with gratitude and hope, knowing that she had found not only a family but also a purpose that gave her life new meaning.